Woman, I know you understand. Darling, darling, stand by me.
He changed the world with 3 chords and a pencil sketch of peace. He also beat his wife and abandoned his first child. The world called him a visionary. But was he actually a fraud in a peace sign t-shirt? Can you be a genius and a bastard at the same time? Before he was a Beatle, before the stadiums, the screams, the scandals, there was a little boy in a broken home. One parent disappeared at sea. The other gave him away like a bag of clothes, raised by an aunt who believed emotions were messy and best avoided. But trauma has a sound. It rattles inside your chest like a drum. And that sound grew louder until the world had no choice but to listen. But fame didn't heal him. It just gave his pain a microphone. And what he did with it? That's where this story splits in two, between the man who gave us Imagine and the man who screamed at his wife while preaching peace. October 9th, 1940, Liverpool, England. As Nazi bombs fell from the sky, a child was born in the maternity ward of Liverpool's Oxford Street Hospital. His name, John Winston Lennon. The air raid sirens were screaming, and in many ways, they never stopped. His father, Alfred Lennon, was a merchant seaman, gone more than he was home. One day, he left and simply never came back. No goodbye, no letter, just absence, which, in young John's life, would become the most consistent thing of all. Julia, his mother, was playful and warm, but emotionally unstable. She loved jazz records, dancing in the kitchen barefoot, and flirting with men. But she didn't love motherhood, at least not enough. When John was just 5 years old, a custody dispute ended in a moment so cruel it haunted him forever. His parents asked him to choose who he wanted to live with. His father begged, his mother wept. And John, overwhelmed and terrified, initially chose his dad. Moments later, he chased his mother down the street sobbing, and that choice changed everything. Julia handed him off to her strict older sister, Mimi Smith, who lived in a tidy house on Menlove Avenue. Mimi didn't believe in hugs, she believed in rules. John could stay, so long as he didn't cry, didn't act out, and didn't ask for too much. Love in that house was transactional, conditional, rare. Julia, meanwhile, remained a specter in his life, occasionally visiting to play records and teach him banjo chords. She introduced him to Elvis, to Chuck Berry, to Rebellion. But just as they began bonding again, tragedy struck. In July 1958, Julia was struck by a car and killed instantly. John was 17. He never got to say goodbye. One friend recalled that John screamed for hours when he found out. Another said he never cried again after that day. Grief doesn't always make people softer. Sometimes it makes them sharper, more dangerous. For Lennon, that trauma became jet fuel. The world had taken his mother. He would take the world. Later that year, he formed a skiffle band with his friends. They called themselves the Quarrymen. Their first gigs were clumsy and wild, more energy than talent. But Lennon had presence, swagger, that crooked smile, that wounded soul that translated into something electric on stage. And then he met Paul. Everything changed in 1966. At a press conference in London, John Lennon casually said, "Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. We're more popular than Jesus now." He didn't mean it as arrogance, he meant it as social commentary. But in America, nuance doesn't always survive the flight. The backlash was immediate. Radio stations in the U.S. Bible Belt organized Beatles bonfires. Fans smashed records, burned memorabilia, and called for the band's exile. The band, especially John, was rattled. This wasn't just noise anymore. This was danger. And he was beginning to unravel. Behind the stage smile, Lennon was imploding. He grew paranoid, irritable, volatile. The pressures of fame, the cracks in his childhood, they all started to surface. Enter LSD. What began as exploration quickly became escapism, the colors, the sounds, the endless spirals of meaning. It was the only thing that made the chaos feel beautiful. He once described acid as the key to the universe, but it didn't unlock peace. It unlocked something darker. His songs turned weirder, sharper. Tomorrow Never Knows. Strawberry Fields Forever.
Is in my tree. I mean, it must be high or low.
Revolution.
When you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out?
They weren't just tunes. They were psychological maps. He wasn't writing from joy. He was writing from a man falling apart in public. Then, in 1967, tragedy struck again. Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager and spiritual compass, was found dead of a sleeping pill overdose. Epstein had been the only adult John trusted, the only one who treated him with care. His death didn't just leave a void, it left the Beatles leaderless. John's behavior spiraled. Rehearsals became tense, recording sessions turned toxic, and then Yoko. Yoko Ono was unlike anyone John had ever met. She was avant-garde, unfiltered, fearless. She didn't just love him, she saw him. Not as a Beatle, not as a product, as a man, a broken one. They became inseparable. He brought her to every recording session. She sat beside him, sometimes literally in his lap, as they tracked vocals. To the other Beatles, it was a violation of an unspoken rule: band first, everything else second. But for John, there was no more band. There was only Yoko, only escape. Together, they recorded experimental noise albums, tracks filled with shrieking, static, poetry, and primal screaming. Critics were baffled, fans were furious. But John didn't care. He once said, "I'd rather be with Yoko in a bag in bed than with the Beatles on top of the world." And so, it ended. In 1970, Paul publicly announced the breakup. John was enraged. He had wanted to announce it first, but in truth, the band had been dying for years. They left behind 13 studio albums, dozens of timeless hits, and 4 men who could no longer stand to be in the same room. John said goodbye to the Beatles, to his brotherhood, to his identity. But even as he stepped away, he hadn't found peace. He had only changed the soundtrack to his pain. December 8, 1980. New York City was dressed in Christmas lights. The chill in the air was sharp but festive. John Lennon had just returned from the recording studio. It was a comeback year. Double Fantasy, his first album in 5 years, had been released just 3 weeks earlier. He felt reborn. More importantly, he felt normal. Earlier that day, a young man named Mark David Chapman had waited outside the Dakota building where John lived with Yoko and their son Sean. He held a copy of Double Fantasy in his hand and a revolver in his coat. John emerged in the late afternoon. Chapman stepped forward. "Mr. Lennon," he said. John smiled, signed the album, even asked, "Is that all?" before heading off to the studio. Later that night, as John and Yoko returned home, they stepped out of their limo onto the sidewalk. Yoko walked a few steps ahead. From the shadows, Chapman emerged, raised the gun, and fired 5 hollow-point bullets into Lennon's back. John staggered up the steps of the Dakota. Blood was pouring from his mouth. He collapsed in the lobby. A doorman screamed. Yoko cried out. The city froze. Rushed to Roosevelt Hospital in a police cruiser, John Lennon was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. Doctors said there was nothing they could have done. He had lost over 80% of his blood in minutes. The world found out almost instantly. Monday Night Football cut into the game with the announcement, "An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building, was shot and killed." The streets outside the Dakota filled with fans. They cried, they sang. They held candles and Beatles albums and photos. One girl just screamed, "He can't be dead. He's not allowed to die." In the days that followed, memorials formed on every continent. Thousands stood in silence in Central Park. Radio stations played Imagine on loop. And for a moment, the entire world stopped spinning, grieving a man who had never stopped trying to change it. But not everyone wept without complexity. In the years that followed, more of John's private darkness came to light. His violence toward women, his emotional abuse of Julian, his erratic cruelty, his moments of staggering hypocrisy. The man who sang, "All you need is love," had spent years struggling to love anyone properly. So, what do we do with that? Do we hold it all together? Do we weigh the scales of his art versus his actions? Or do we do the thing Lennon himself could never do, and accept that both can be true, that a person can be broken and still build beauty, that a song can save lives, even if its writer was lost? John Lennon was not a saint. He was not a monster. He was a mirror, reflecting the genius and the rot that live in all of us. He dreamed aloud, failed loudly, loved messily, and died still trying to make sense of it all. Was John Lennon a visionary trapped in his own demons? Or just a man whose fame made us forgive the unforgivable? Drop your take in the comments below. Want more real stories that shine and scar in the same breath? Click the next video lighting up now, because genius is never clean, and the legends only get darker.